Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. Simply pour a can in your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
I met Jon Gabrio about 15 years ago. We both grew up here in Western Washington, and as I grew Phelps game calls, Jon was kind of responsible for everything, website graphics, and anything that made us look good. Became great friends over the years. Jon has had some great success in the field and may be best known for his late season mountain whitetails here in Washington, but also gets it done on elk and mule deer every year. How are you doing, Jon?
I'm good, man. I'm alive and kicking. Can't complain.
I think we first hunted together in 2016, archery, Idaho, and then the last time we hunted together was just recently here in New Mexico. Me, you, and Dirk went there in 2020. We've had some great trips together, but today I really want to dive in to whitetail hunting, whitetail calling, everything whitetail, and I'm going to be completely honest, like I know enough, but I don't know the intricacies and the details, so I really want to dive in and talk to you about some of that, right on the heels of us launching our brand new deer call category, which should be launching October 10th. You've got a chance to play around with them, so we'll definitely dive into the new deer calls, kind of the offering and what we're bringing to the table as far as that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for that line of calls. Just for myself, obviously being a big whitetail hunter and whatnot, and I love it. And I got a chance to mess with them and obviously do the photography and whatnot for them too. And so it gave me a chance to kind of be hands-on. And I'm excited for you guys to come out with those.
Thanks. So now we're going to jump into our listener questions. Once again, if you have your own questions for me or our guests, please submit them at ctd@phelpsgamecalls.com. These ones are a little more geared towards whitetail, so they'll be right up John's alley. The first one is, when looking for a whitetail spot, just in general, what would you look for? Back up to a 30,000 foot view, Jon, what makes a good whitetail spot, at least in the western mountains that you typically do your whitetail hunting?
Yeah, I would say the biggest key that I look for is I start tearing apart maps, Onyx and whatever else, Google Earth. The biggest thing that I'm looking for are pinch points, like ridges, big mountain ranges, and a bunch of like finger ridges that'll run down into like a flat type of a alder, willow bottom type flat, or even some big timber that has some water around, but it provides an ample kind of trail system that those deer can come down. Those big bucks will kind of hang out up higher on the mountain, and as the rut starts, they'll kind of work their way down and into these benches, and they'll travel the same kind of ridges coming down, and then they'll hit and they'll rut. And that would kind of be like the 30,000 foot view without really diving down into it after that. But really looking for a lot of finger ridges, like 3, 4, 5, 6 that'll come together. And where those come together, those deer will travel down and they'll hit that bench. And that's kind of where you'll have some of your best action.
Gotcha. So in Washington specifically, since that's what you know the best, and it may be, are you looking for certain elevations? Are you looking for no matter if the mountain goes up to 3,000 feet, you're trying to be at like 3/4 of that height? How does that work? Does any mountain hold a whitetail? Are you trying to get to like certain elevations or just certain areas on the ridge line?
Yeah, so that's kind of the tough part. I guess it really depends on weather. Like usually in November when we're over there hunting them, the weather is key. And if you get up too high, like we've had years where all of a sudden freak storm will come in and we'll get 20, 24 inches of snow, and you can't even make it to some of your stands. So I kind of have several areas that I've picked out. Some of my stands are lower; they might only be 2,500 to 3,200 feet. And then some of my other stands are 3,500 to 4,400 feet in elevation. Anything above that 4,400 feet, you're really risking it if a big snowstorm comes in. But I've found that a lot of those bucks will kind of hang out in that 3,500 to like 4,000 foot range. And some of the bigger deer are kind of in that higher 4,000, 4,200 range. But you're definitely going to be pushing you're chaining up usually a lot of years trying to get to those stands, but it's the best hunting. So it just kind of depends. I have a multitude of, areas scouted out in different areas depending on the weather. But definitely looking at those little bit higher elevations. Some stands I've had at 5,000, 5,500 feet. And the thing you start running into there is mule deer. And so, it's like, you start fighting the mule deer herds, but I've had some giant whitetail bucks at that elevation too. So, yeah, it's kind of depends, but I would say that 3,500 to 42 ish range is probably your best bet where I'm at. I know other guys that hunt them at 6,000 feet. So it just kind of depends.
Gotcha. So if I kind of to reiterate what you said, you're looking for a lot of finger ridges that kind of lead into this a similar or a shared bottom. So those travel corridors is what you're looking for a whitetail spot that you want to invest some time.
Yep. 100%.
Okay. All right. Question number 2. If you could only hunt for a 10-day section of the season, when would you hunt? So I guess give us your best action, bucks pushing does. When would that 10 days be?
Where I'm at, I would say probably like the 18th through the 28th of November. Like that last like 10 days ish of the month is probably your hottest, heaviest action. I've actually shot a lot of deer before that. But you're trying to pattern them at that point, and it's just different hunting. You're not going to see near the action. But that last part of the month is definitely your best time.
Okay, and keep in mind, we are in northern Washington, and is the you go further south, that rut gets a little bit later. So keep that in mind. We're talking specifically about northern Washington. As you move south throughout the country, the rut's going to become later. You move north, the rut's going to be a little bit earlier. So I know we're going to Kansas this year for my first whitetail hunt, and we're trying to hit that like November 10th to 20th, which I would think would be maybe a tad early, but it's kind of like trying to hit just enough of that pre-rut right to when they're going to be kind of in the peak and do that. So that's when we had elected to put our 10 days was November 10th to the 20th. Should be a good time that kind of guarantees you're in that pre to prime rut.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say with you picking those dates, and honestly, I usually start hunting around that time frame myself, is you'll catch some of those big deer out cruising looking for their first doe before they get on their lockdown. When you start getting into that 18th on, you'll risk one of your big bucks. He'll get on a doe, and then they'll just lock themselves down. And it might be 2-3 days, and he'll vanish like completely off your camera, out of the area. He'll be gone. So I would say, if I had to pick, if you want to truly hunt like one big deer, I would be looking at those earlier dates when you're going. I think that'll be prime time.
Yep. Relating back to elk, it's always fun to be out there during the peak rut, listen to bugling. But I've always said, if you want to kill those bigger bulls, sometimes it's easier to do, just on the front side of that peak rut when they are on lockdown and they're in full control of that herd. So it sounds like it's very relatable to whitetail deer hunting.
100%. You're spot on.
I always joked around that I was going to hunt whitetails when I turned 70 and couldn't walk around and chase mule deer anymore. But I'm pretty excited. Change it up, do something new. And I think there are, hunting's hunting, that, it's just it's a culmination of putting together lots of, information and strategies and where you're seeing deer and what you're seeing them doing and trying to come up with the best plan and, think a win. So I'm excited to see, how all this whitetail thing comes together.
Yeah, 100%. I'm excited for you to go sit in a tree and freeze, and then you can tell me all about it.
Oh, it'll be fun. So once again, if you've got your own questions for us here at Cutting the Distance, please submit your questions to ctd@phelpsgamecalls.com. Now I'm going to dive into my questions for you, Jon, on whitetail hunting. But first, I want to do a little recap on your elk season, if you're willing to talk about it. We stay in touch. We text. I think I was in Oregon while you were in Montana there. You and your wife had a very successful hunt, and I just wanted to give us a quick five-minute recap on how all that went down, if you can.
Yeah, for sure. It was fun just kind of texting back and forth and seeing what we each had going on. Obviously it's your buddies and you want to see them be successful. So, but yeah, we spent a lot of time this year. We'd never set foot in this place and scouted it all summer, packed in water, did everything right, and just put in a ton of work. I mean, I was on Google Earth and Onyx like literally every single night, making plans A through Z and then some. And it paid off. We got in, I was on bulls pretty much every single day. I don't think there was a day I never had a bull come by within bow range. And we had found a bull that I found during the summer, and I lost him after he shed, and then ended up picking him back up at about day 6 or 7 of the hunt. And he had like 30 cows, and we watched him and couldn't make a play. Had him the next day at like 800 yards all day, and just the wind was messed up. And then all those cows, there's too many eyes. And the weird thing is he didn't have any satellite bulls running around. And so they had all kind of vanished. And then they moved off that night. And then I knew where they headed. They went north. And so we went the next day, didn't see them, couldn't turn them up. Literally we kind of backed out, and we were like, let's go back to camp for the day and just like regroup for a second and just kind of relax. And then we'll go out in the evening and try a whole new area. And ended up churning him up like 5 miles away north. And he was out in this big sage flat, like all on his own. And there was like 100 cows. He lost all 30 cows. And then there was like 100 cows with about 4 bulls about 2.5 miles away. And Kylie ended up spotting her bull at about a mile away-ish, and it had 4 cows and a calf. And we watched him, and, it was kind of one of those things. The wind was perfect, and here they came, feeding across this big sage flat, headed towards us. And, it's kind of one of those things. At first, it was like, I don't know if we're even going to get a play on them. Like, we were on a scouting mission, honestly, like sitting back with spotting scopes and whatnot, just like looking at these elk. And pretty quick, more elk started popping up all over the place. And here came her bull with these 4 cows and a calf. And I'm, how you do, you're just like, well, they're feeding towards us, and this could be really good for us because the wind's good, except we're not in a good spot. We're in the wide open. And I don't know. I mean, it was like just instinct kind of took over. And I was like, Kylie, I was like, we got to run like as fast as we can, like around 400 yards around the backside of this hill, and like pop out. I was like, they're going to come through this saddle to our left, and we got to get the wind right. And I was like, I don't even know if they're going to come by, but I was like, they're going to come by somewhere in there. So I was like, we might get a shot, we might not. And then my bull spots her bull, and her elk's like 800 yards away at that point. And my bull is like a mile off, and he sees them and starts just ripping bugles. And I was like, oh boy, here we go. I was like, he's going to come take those cows. Not sure where his 30 cows went. So we got in position, ran around like 400 yards, got behind the only rock and bush that was in the area. And I started ripping off like 3 like loudest cow calls I could. And they all heard it. And then here they came, and they started across. And then I peek over the top, and like 50 yards, one of the cows pops up. And I'm like, crap, knock an arrow. Like they're right here on our lap. And we did. And then her bull ended up pushing one of the cows like right by us and literally jumped over the rock that we're behind. We had like feet, like 4 or 5 feet in the air above us. And it was the craziest thing I've ever seen. They run by us. He's chasing this cow. She stops like 40 yards behind us. He runs back. And in the meantime, I look back in front of me and I look up and there's a cow standing there at like 3 feet from the end of my arrow. And I was like, oh boy, we're done. And he runs back up, stops at 7 yards, and it spooked the cow in front of me, thank God, because otherwise I would have been stuck. And he puts his head down, grabs a piece of grass, lifts his head. She just drew her bow back, and he just stood there looking at her, shot him, and then he turns, runs down back where they came from, takes the cows and the calf with him. And it was one of those things, the big bull was like bugling the whole time coming in, but I totally spaced because I was more focused on her, shooting that bull, her first bull with a bow. And I jumped up, we hugged and we yelled, and I was like watching blood just pouring out of her bull. And I look at like 100 yards and the big bull is standing there and his head's just swiveling all over the place. And I was like, oh no. And I was like, we just blew this. So I did like 3 quick cow calls just to calm everything down. And he lost his mind and just started bugling and ran right into 13 yards and came out on the other side of the bush. And I shot him and he just ran down and both the elk fell over at the same time. Like literally mine fell over and hers fell over at the same time. And dude, it was pretty wild, but just seeing her get her first one with a bow, and we had put in so much work. I mean, we had bulls all over the place. And I actually let on my first morning, I let like a 330-40 bull walk at 28 yards. And I was like, man, did I do the right thing? Just that's a big bull that a lot of people want to kill. And well, it turns out I did. And at least I got this bull that I'd watched all summer, and we just made the right game plan and we got him. So
yeah,
it was fun.
Yeah, that's pretty cool to double and see it all come together like that. So no, congrats on your guys' elk season. Now we're going to dive in to the whitetail hunting and some of the questions that I have. So when you set up an area, we talked earlier from one of the listener questions, like, how do you set up an area? And then the next thing you're going to obviously have to do is go scout it. You're not going to want to jump or invest a bunch of time into an area that maybe doesn't, have deer in it or won't have deer in it. So when do you start scouting? How do you scout and kind of how do you put that together? Because a lot of these deer are in the thick timber, you can't necessarily glass them up. So I'm assuming you're going, trail cameras. Are you putting them on the ridges? Kind of let us know how you scout and when you start scouting, so that at least those deer are going to be in the area, when you start hunting.
Yeah, for sure. So I have a lot of the areas that we hunt now, and it was obviously easier when I lived in Washington to scout it than it is now. But if it was a brand new area that we'd never been to, we would go over during the summer and just like litter the place with trail cameras, like just trying to find these trails, and then find these benches and whatnot. And you'll find what are called like a community scrape, and they'll actually hit this scrape all year round and just kind of mark it. And it'll be bigger than like a normal scrape that'll happen during the rut. It'll be something, 3-4 feet across, sometimes bigger. And if you hike around, you'll find these. And so we would start setting up trail cameras on these, and these deer will hit these things, kind of all season, especially during the rut and stuff too. And then other ruts or other scrapes will show up. But then we obviously are looking for rubs and, that type of thing, and trying to see, is there, scrape lines, rub lines, like stuff that, these deer will make. And if you go early in the spring before it greens up, that stuff stands out like, a sore thumb. So that's what we would do when we first started, really scouting new areas. And then after we learned, kind of where the deer were, obviously there's a lot of area where there is no deer. And so, it's kind of trial and error, run the cameras, see what's on them, find these spots. And then once we did, then, it's easy to go back and then kind of expand on those core areas and like dive down in a little bit and get a little deeper, and then really start tearing it apart. But yeah, you're right. So a lot of these big bucks, whitetail in general, they don't travel, out in clear cuts much. And especially where we hunt, like there just isn't any, like it's all big, thick timber. And so if you don't run cameras, I mean, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Like you'll never find these deer. And what's wild is like they have a, general rifle season, muzzleloader season, everything else that goes along before we even get a chance to hunt. And if those animals, if people did their research and knew like what was truly running around, man, they'd probably do a lot better with a rifle. But we've had a lot of years where, these bucks, we have them year after year after year. And I'm just shocked that they make it through rifle season. But it's like these people just, they don't hunt the way that we do. They don't know those deer are even around. And, during October, I mean, those big deer are just so nocturnal that, I mean, you're never going to shoot one and you can't sneak up on them unless you're in a tree stand. So.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I know, we get to follow along, as you share your pictures and stuff. So you're scouting, let's say you got your trail cameras up and, big bucks are in the area. It sounds like you're hunting, mid to late November. If those deer are there in November, like they're going to be there, come the rut. Like are you saying they're going to be in that same area year round, or do they move into certain areas, prior to that rut? And then once they're there, say late October, early November, you're just banking on them eventually coming back by, or, being in that area.
Yeah, so some of the areas that we hunt, those deer literally live there year round. Like I've figured out where they live, and I've just like these particular draws always hold big bucks, and these deer will live in there. I mean, they do not come out of there. And so I do have a few areas that I set up stands and cameras and whatnot on, that the deer will move in when the rut starts. And it's just kind of one of those things like, elk, for example, like over the years, you'll figure out and they just rut in a certain area. And I do have a few spots that I found where these deer will come down in, they rut, and that is the only time you're ever going to see like that particular buck. Versus, I mean, he could live 5 miles away over the backside of a mountain range, like, and, show up. I have had deer literally 8-9 miles away, and they'll come over 2 mountain ranges, drainages, like a long ways, and show up on a camera all of a sudden, during the rut, like they'll start cruising. But you can kind of find their core home, like their core area. If they're there during the summer where I'm hunting, at least these deer will be there like all season. And, give or take, they might move, a half mile, a mile, but a lot of the big ones, they literally will live within like a 1 mile square area, like all year, and won't move.
Gotcha. So that's a great point on, scouting and figuring out. So the next decision, I'm assuming that has to be made, once you do your scouting, is where are you going to set up your tree stand, or where are you going to set up your ground blind, and some of those things that will now affect us. So we've established that we've got, a target buck or some target bucks in your area. You're looking at where you're going to set your stand up. Are you setting your stand up right at your camera? Are you looking at travel corridors, within that area, or where you think maybe the does are going to travel more so than that buck? And then the other thing I'm assuming is wind. We've got our prevailing wind, which is, and then you've got your thermals, and then you've got, that time of year, you've got storm systems and stuff coming in. Like, give us a little bit on how you're going to establish where you're setting your stand. And then is it based on, how it relates to travel corridors and the wind direction?
Yeah. So what we do generally, we're hunting them in the mountains. So it's a lot different than farm fields, where you'll get that prevailing wind generally, and you'll know when a storm system comes in, what the wind's going to do. Kind of ironically, we look at like elk hunting, the way that we hunt and set our stands for whitetails. The wind is usually pulling down in the morning pretty hard, down these draws. And so we'll try to come in from the bottom and get our stuff set up where we can access it with the wind in our face. Generally, the deer will be above us, kind of know where they're hanging out. Obviously, we'll bump some when we're coming in it sometimes, but it's just part of it. But generally, we try to come in from the bottom and get the wind right. And also when we're leaving in the evening, that way we go out and the wind is, obviously it's pulling down, but the deer are above us. So we're walking out with the wind, in our favor going out. It's at our back, but we're not bumping deer. So that's kind of what we look at when we're trying to access an area. Obviously, I have like 6-8 different stands set up in different areas. Some places I might have 2 at the same spot, so I can come in a different way. If a storm rolls in or something and it changes the thermals, or it gets kind of weird throughout the day, I might, get down and move over to another spot. So that's kind of the kicker. But then what I'm looking for, and this, it's kind of ironic in a way, like the does will come in and they'll walk a certain trail, and you'd think that like all the deer are going to walk that same trail. But I've found the littler bucks, like your 1.5 to like 3.5, maybe even 4.5-year-old deer, they'll kind of follow the same trails as the does. But if you start getting in that 4.5, 5.5 plus age deer, he will literally try to get the wind right, and he'll come in and walk his own trail like 20 yards below like the main trail that like all the other deer take, and just so he can smell them as he's walking along. And it's weird. Like I've watched enough big bucks over the years, and they never come in where you think they're gonna. They always are low or high, like wherever the wind is. During the day, obviously they'll go be above it because of thermals, but I'll try to figure out where he's coming from and where I think I'm going to have my best opportunity for a shooting lane. And I'll put my stand back where I can access it, but where he's more likely to come out of like a thick patch of brush or something. And where he's going to end up walking on his own trail. And what I'll do, I'll literally like go look at big buck tracks and I'll backtrack them and try to figure out like where that buck is bedding. Obviously, I try to do it preseason. So if I bump him, he'll hopefully be back in there before like the time of year when I'm going to hunt him. But I've learned so much after I've actually like harvest shot a deer or whatever. I've like learned so much those next few days after, and I'll like go back to my other stands and backtrack the big deer and figure out where they were coming from. And that just takes years of learning. But once you figure that out, it's like, then I'll be able to move in there the next year and, set my stand up and boom, like that's where you'll know where you want to put it. So it's kind of a combination of certain things, but look at, whatever way the wind's going, generally, if you're in the timber and it's pulling down or whatnot, and that time of year, it's so cold out that the wind seems to be pulling downhill a lot. And the deer he'll be below that trail like 20 yards every time. So it's like I'll set up off that trail a little bit, 20 yards below it or so. And then if he comes on that trail at 20, I'm shooting there. If he hits the main trail, I'm shooting 40. And, it is what it is.
We've all seen plenty of gadgets and fads come and go, but here's one product that stood the test of time: Seafoam Motor Treatment. Lots of hunters and anglers know that Seafoam helps engines run better and last longer. It's really simple. When you pour it in your gas tank, Seafoam cleans harmful fuel deposits that cause engine problems. I'm talking common stuff like hard starts, rough engine performance, or lost fuel economy. Seafoam is an easy way to prevent or overcome these problems. Just pour a can in your gas tank and let it clean your fuel system. You probably know someone who has used a can of Seafoam to get their truck or boat going again. People everywhere rely on Seafoam to keep their trucks, boats, and small engines running the way that they should the entire season. Help your engine run better and last longer. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Now we're going to move on to maybe one of the most contentious topics when it comes to whitetail deer hunting, and you've got people on both ends of the spectrum, but I'm just looking for your own opinion on scent. The thermals aren't always going to work the way you want. The wind isn't always going to do what you want. So what's your opinion on scent, and how much precaution do you take when dealing with that?
So are we talking like scent control, or are we talking like deer scents?
I would say like scent control. How important is it we'll talk about attractants and stuff here in a little bit, but just your own scent and making sure that, you're not spooking, deer out of the area.
Yeah, for sure. So that we kind of have mixed opinions on that. And I've, heard so many different opinions, but I'm the type of guy, like I use a lot of like dead downwind and those scent killers and whatnot. I try to shower every night and, use everything I can. I'll spray my clothes down, my boots down every single night. The thing is, I found, we've kind of adopted the ground blind game here over the last few years, 5-6 years, actually, since my sister started hunting with us. And it's weird being on the ground in a blind. You can get away with so much more than you can when you're sitting in a stand. I love sitting in a stand because I have way more shooting opportunity. When you're in the ground blind, you've only got like one little window or two to shoot out of. So the deer has to cross where you're shooting. But I feel like we've got away with like murder sitting in that stand or in the ground blind. And so my dad, and sister, they'll spray down every now and then and, a couple days type thing and whatnot. I do it every single night. I don't know if it truly makes a difference. If it doesn't, all I know is that I've had days where I get winded and, it's like, I don't know if it's because, the winds are horrible and just swirling too much. Those seem to be the days when I get winded. But I feel my thing is whether the stuff works or not. I mean, it's on the market. There's so much of it and something has to work. And I feel like, in my opinion, like it has to be better than not doing anything. So I'm like, if it just gives me that extra second to fool that deer, or like not be smelled and I get the shot, I'm all for it. The other kicker is like my stands. I set my tree stands like 23 to 26 feet usually. And I found at about 20 to 22 feet, the thermals change. Like the wind will actually change. I used to set them all around that 20-foot mark and I would get winded. Once I went higher, then I stopped getting winded as much. And seen. So it's like there's definitely a gap right there in that 22-foot range, 20 foot, where the wind will change and you can get away with so much more. I still use my scent control. I haven't ever stopped since day one. I think, it's kind of one of those things, like maybe a superstitious thing. I'm like, man, if I do this, like it's going to bring me good luck. But I feel like it works. And that, I guess it's kind of in my own head. So I'll keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's what people are comfortable with and what they feel works. So, now in Washington, I know the rules have changed over the last few years, but we're allowed to use, baits in small quantity. And then also you were mentioning like deer attractants or scents. What's your opinion on baits and attractants, how you use them, and then, the advantages and disadvantages of baits and attractants?
Yeah. So, I mean, dude, we've done everything. And like, we have stands. I mean, we set up every year and we'll put bait out and whatnot because we're allowed to bait in Washington. And it kind of varies, where we're at and, what we put out and what we do. I have other stands where I literally just hunt scrapes and, rub lines and that type of thing, but generally big scrapes. And I'll put out, like Buck Fever Synthetics, like they have their scrape, I forgot exactly the name of it. I have to dig it out, but it's they have a like rut scent, and then they have a mock scrape scent. And I'll build my own scrapes, or if I have scrapes that I've found over the years, and I'll dump some of that in it. And I love hunting that way because I feel like the true big bucks. I'll be honest, like I mean, yes, we've killed a few over bait, but like the true big ones don't come to the bait. Like they will stay outside of it and they'll stop at 30, 40 yards and like look over there. And if there's not a doe there, they're spooky, man. Like it's not the same. If you're hunting a scrape, he's a lot more like he's still super cautious and they're so spooky compared to like a mule deer or an elk, but they'll come in and it's like almost like their guards down a little bit because they're like, oh, hey, another deer has peed here and made his own scrape, rubbed these limbs, done whatever, and I'm just leaving my scent. And so he's definitely less cautious. And so it's like if they come in and they're coming into bait, man, it's like they're on edge and it is hard to shoot them. Like it's like, you better not be making a noise or have your clothes make a noise or anything. I've had bucks come in and literally like lose their mind, spook just at me trying to draw my bow back, and I barely even moved. And so it's hard. But does the bait bring in deer? Yes. Like, if, guys over there, they'll throw out alfalfa. Some people throw out corn, that type of thing. The thing that I will caution, like if you ever use corn or something, depending where you're hunting, bears will find it in the early part of November, and you're going to scare every deer out of the country because a bear will come in and live on it and eat it. So you kind of got to be careful with that. The alfalfa is probably the better way to go. But obviously you can't put that much out in Washington. I think it's 2 5-gallon buckets still, and which is not much. And the does, if you can get the does hanging around eating that, like obviously a big buck's going to come in, but I could count on one hand over the years between my dad's sister and I, and how many we've actually got like the big ones, like eating the bait. Like they just don't. So I tend to follow my pinch points and the scrapes, and then I'll use those primarily as my main hunting opportunity.
Yeah, I've been talking to Randy Milligan, my buddy there in Kansas, and it's the same thing. Like those big bucks, they're not interested in eating the bait pile or the feeder or anything like that. And so a lot of his, those bucks are coming in checking for does, but then they're going to stay, 100 yards off, downwind of that, and they're just really checking on does. They have no desire to go eat, out of any sort of bait or artificial food source or anything like that. So it sounds like it's real similar, even in farm country compared to high mountain whitetails. Those big bucks are just at a different level, and they're not interested in exposing themselves, in the wide open or going to a spot like that.
100%.
All right, so we touched on this question a little bit that I had for you is kind of when to hunt whitetails. We kind of picked November 18th to 28th, but are there elements or things that affect it? Like, is there a weather pattern or a type of weather that just gets you super stoked to get up in the stand? Like what's your favorite time to hunt whitetail? Like a 2-inch dusting of snow, 12 inches of new snow. Like what's that ultimate day you just need to be in the stand?
Yeah. So my absolute favorite day is to be sitting there the day before, and if I know a storm system is coming of any sort. So it's like, could be, like tomorrow it's going to just pour down rain or a snowstorm is coming in. Man, the night before can be really good because those animals know a storm's coming. So they'll get up and start moving. But then the day the storm hits, and my personal favorite is to be sitting in a stand midday and have that storm roll in. If a storm rolls in at any point, like during that day, and all of a sudden it gets, it could be blowing, could be nasty, starts snowing. The big one is if it starts snowing. And I've had so many days where I'm sitting there and it's just a cool, calm day, and then all of a sudden the weather starts changing and snowflakes start falling out of the sky. Those big bucks get on their feet, and they every time. I would say most of the big ones I've killed has been in that weather condition. Like the weather changes and boom, here they come. Now, that being said, if there's no storm coming in, but it's going to get cold or there's snow on the ground, my next kind of favorite time would be like 6 to 8, 10 and 12 inches of snow and as cold as it can get. Like just clear skies, but let the temperatures drop, hopefully. We've been sitting over there some years and it's -2 degrees and we sit there for 10 hours a day, don't get out, but the deer move all day. Like they will be roaming around. They're coming in because it's cold. They are checking does. They're looking for does, and you will have so much activity the colder it gets. And so that's probably my second favorite time. But the storm rolling in is like the ultimate. If you get a day like that, you're going to kill a big one.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Similar to other hunting. Pre system. During the system, and then what I don't like on at least what I've hunted is like the same weather for 10 days in a row. Like you want you want weather patterns that are changing in order to get the deer moving. So no, that makes a ton of sense. So now we're going to get into more of what I would consider, what I would think is the funnest part is calling to the deer, audibly, attracting a deer to your location. And I'm going to take a little bit to kind of just announce that new deer call line we've got. We've got a full category. We've got 3 different grunt calls coming out. We've got a bleat, adjustable bleat, and then we've also got a fallen in distress call for calling in some of those muleys that are on lockdown and some of the other stuff we do. So we've got an alpha grunter, which is the deepest sounding grunt we've got. We've got a beta, which is more of a full acrylic, I would call it like a duck style deer call. And then we've got a omega, which is a hybrid acrylic plastic call that's fully adjustable. We've got a DOA bleat, and then that fall in distress. So we're excited to release those finally on October 10th. But let's jump into your kind of your whitetail deer calling strategy, kind of the calls you use, your approach, whether you're randomly blowing on a call every, 15 minutes, or if you do it at certain times, and then how you go about, bringing those deer to your location through calls.
Yeah, for sure. So one thing, if it's earlier in the season, that kind of early to mid-November timeframe, we do a lot of rattling and grunting, and like kind of tending grunts, type thing, or, something to kind of like, hey, maybe this buck's tending a doe already, and try to pique their interest. And so the rattling works really good early. It's like the bucks are, they're fighting, they're trying to establish their dominance. And we've had some really good luck rattling in some big deer, that come in that time of year. And obviously a ton of small deer too, that come in and they're just trying to figure out where the party's at. And so that works really good then. But then as kind of things progress into the rut a little farther, little heavier, hotter, what we tend to do is we'll still do maybe a rattle here and there, like let them know, like, hey, maybe there's some bucks fighting over here. Like one of these does, is in estrus, like she's hot, and try to pique their interest still. But what I like to do is the early morning, like first thing, right when I get in the stand, right at daylight, is maybe do like a couple just, buck grunts, like, hey, I'm over here, or tending grunt type style, and let them know. And then the other thing I'll do is like kind of that doe in estrus, bleat type thing, and just let them know like, hey, maybe there's, a doe over here. And so I'll do like a doe bleat, and then I'll do like 2, 3, 4 grunts right after that, and let them know that, hey, something's going on over here, and see if obviously there's got to be a deer close enough to hear it. And that's a tough part about where we hunt in the mountains. It's those deer live in those draws, but it deadens the sound so much where like a farm field, it'll kind of carry farther. So the deer has to be somewhat close, but we'll go in, do those bleats, and then I'll shut up for, a while. And then I might do like 1 or 2 sessions, like 15 minutes apart right in the morning. And then I might not do anything until like 10, 11 o'clock, like midday. And what we found, honestly, like a lot of the big bucks in the morning, even sometimes they'll be laying down at daylight already because they've rutted all night. And then 10 to 2, midday, is when we've seen most of our big deer over the years. And those big bucks get curious. They're up. They've rested up in the morning, and they're like, hey, I'm going to start cruising again. And, 10 to 2, we joke about it. People get out of their stands, they go back to their truck, eat lunch, take a nap, whatever. And, we're in the woods, and boom, out walks the big guy. So I might do some more calling. Maybe, it depends on, what's going on and what phase of the rut I'm in, maybe a rattle or something, but do another doe bleed or 2, and, some grunts, or maybe it's just some grunts type of thing, like 2, 3 grunts, or like act like they're tending a doe, that type of thing. And man, I've had some really good luck midday in doing that. And I've literally had bucks like run in, and they'll all of a sudden they'll come in, they're looking, trying to figure out where the noise came from. And then of course, it's too late usually. And where I set my stands, and I guess this kind of goes back to the stand location thing, I try to set my stand in a spot where I can get a shot, but a spot that it's super thick for the deer, so he'll run in and feel like he's hid. And you're looking down on him, so you can see him and get away with a lot. And he'll stand there looking around. like maybe out into an opening trying to see that doe, but you're on the edge of the thick cover, and then make your move.
Perfect. Now I have to ask a question on when you're grunting. Are you trying to be a dominant buck, or are you trying to be, sound like a slightly younger buck? Like, what's your strategy there? Do you want to let that big buck know that maybe a smaller buck's running does or in the area? Can you give us a little input on what type of buck you're trying to sound like?
Yeah, for sure. So, and this kind of is two-sided, I guess. It depends. If it's earlier in the season and I'm rattling and whatnot, I try to sound like a big buck. And I just, it's like, hey, come get me, like I'm trying to establish my dominance and let's duke it out. As it goes on, and, I've done both and I've had results with both, but then at other times I'm like, man, like, did I scare the deer off? Like, I'm not sure. Maybe they went into a lockdown phase and like disappeared. And here I'm thinking I scared him off, but he's really not. He's just on lockdown. But I tend to do like a little bit, try to sound like a little bit of a younger buck that's on a doe. That way, it's like he thinks that, oh, hey, here's this younger like buck that's over here running my does. I'm going to go over there and I'm going to kill him, type of thing. And, I'm taking that doe back. And so I've always tried to play that strategy a little bit, is like, don't sound like the biggest, most dominant buck in the area. The thing that I run into, I'm not fortunate enough to hunt these big, farm fields and these big, ranches and stuff back in the Midwest where there's literally hundreds of deer on these ranches. We're hunting deer that there's like, maybe 2-3 bucks, and, it's like one big buck and 2-3 like smaller, immature bucks. And then like 2 or 3 does. And like, that's it in my whole, like one of my stands, like that'll be it. So I don't want to go in there sounding like another big dominant buck usually, because there might only be one big dominant buck there. And he knows, like, he'll be like, nope, these other deer that are here, there's 2 or 3 little guys. And, I know who you are. Don't, and a big one rolls in. And then I don't know. I feel like sometimes like they get spooked by that because they're aware that there's not tons of deer in the area. Now, if I had an area where there was 10 big bucks, like, sure, maybe. So that I always try to play that younger buck and like, let him know that, hey, one of the little guys is in here running them.
That makes a ton of sense, and a little bit relatable to elk, even though the one downside with elk is you just can't, keep up with the volume. So we always try to sound as absolutely big as we can and still end up falling short of a real elk. But that makes a ton of sense on, especially in an area where the deer kind of have their pecking order figured out. They kind of know what's there and what's around. Like, unless an outside buck just showed up in the area, he's probably starting to question like, hey, I haven't heard you before. I know you're not in the area. So it makes a ton of sense. I really appreciate having you on here, Jon. Sharing some of your whitetail tips and tactics. And to close, if you had one tip to maybe help a new whitetail hunter, somebody who wants to go try, mountain whitetail hunting, what would that tip be?
Oh man, one tip. I would say my single biggest tip that I could give someone is days in the stand. Like, just spend the time out there, literally look, find those travel corridors, find scrapes, and just get in the stand and sit. It's like, it's a waiting game. And I've had too many guys go over and they spend 2 days. I didn't see a deer. And there's days that I go by and I never see a deer, but you just got to keep sitting there. Don't get out of your stand, sit all 10 hours, daylight till dark, and just put in the time. Like, something will happen.
That's a great tip. Time is always the number one, no matter what type of hunting, just putting time in the field, something's going to happen, whether it's good or bad, but, putting yourself out there, punching that time clock as much as possible is always, one of the best tips. So I really appreciate having you on here, Jon. Congrats to you and Kylie on your guys' elk season, and good luck and everything, moving forward. And I think it sounds like we may join up and do my Washington elk hunt here in the next couple weeks together. So looking forward to spending some time with you and appreciate you being on here.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me on. I can't wait to see you put your tag on a giant bull.
I hope so. Thanks a lot, Jon. Take care.
Thanks, man.
Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. Simply pour a can in your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.